Why has John got at the beginning what the other gospel writers have got at the end? I think the solution is simple. For John, this temple cleansing is nothing short of Jesus' manifesto.
This is your nautical lantern on the dangerous seas of darkness. Let's push off from the placid shore of the status quo and explore what's beyond the horizon. I am your host, BT, and this is Truth and Shadow, your podcast of the supernatural.
There's a period in the summertime when the days are incredibly hot, and then the nights, the temperatures drop off into the cold. During the daytime, I use the air conditioner to keep cool, and then in the evenings, it begins to drop off. I find myself needing to turn the heater on, and this was that kind of evening. And I had found myself lost, deep in thought, as I stared down and looked at the title page that began the Gospel of John. Of all the apostles and all the writings found within the New Testament, those written by John have always been fascinating to me. Not merely because of theological implications, no, but there were these deep mysteries held within the verses. And one such mystery was the mention of the temple, place of profound significance. Not merely historically, but spiritually. The temple, as described in John, is this magnificent physical structure, but not merely that. It's a symbol, a metaphor, maybe even a key to understanding the divine interplay between what we can see and what we can't, between the seen and the unseen. My contemplative thought meandered to John chapter 2. Jesus speaks these words, these powerful, mysterious words. Destroy this temple and raise it again in 3 days. His audience was perplexed, believing that he was referring to the grand edifice in Jerusalem, the structure that took 46 years to build. But John clarifies this with his insight. But the temple he had spoken of was his body. You know, as a podcaster and amateur investigator researcher with a penchant for the paranormal, I couldn't help but draw parallels between this and other mysteries that I have encountered talking to other people, reading their books, and investigating these curious things. It's this concept of the temple being a body, Jesus' body. Spoke to the idea of vessels, of containers, or something greater than themselves. The human body houses the soul. The physical temple housed the divine presence. What if the temple was a conduit, a bridge between the earthly and the divine? Perhaps the temple represented a point of contact between God and humanity. The Gospel of John, we have Jesus cleansing the temple, and it's this pivotal moment, this bout of Jesus' righteous anger where he overturns the money changers' tables. Wasn't a protest against corruption. It was a declaration of purpose. Stop turning my Father's house into a market, he declared. We learn that the temple is shown as a sacred space, and it can be easily desecrated by the mundane and profane. And it's a reminder that the divine must not be trivialized, and the sacred should remain untarnished. This Gospel of John, presenting Jesus as the new temple, as the ultimate bridge between God and humanity. His body, broken, resurrected, becomes a new meeting place for the divine and the mortal. And as this profound shift from a physical structure to a living being, I felt redefined the concept of sacred space. Not about walls and stones, but about hearts and souls. In the shadows of our world, the search for truth continues, and sometimes the answers lie hidden in plain sight, waiting for those with the eyes to see.
Dreams seem to serve as a window into the subconscious mind, revealing truths that our waking minds may overlook. Psychical research, while often met with skepticism, can offer intriguing insights into the phenomena that challenge conventional understanding. When it comes to Christian theology, interpretations vary, but some theologians suggest that dreams could be a means through which divine messages are conveyed. How do you reconcile these realms, dreams, psychical research, and Christian theology into your own worldview? Therefore, why not invite a guest on who is an internationally respected writer, speaker, who has researched and written extensively within the fields of religion, spirituality, and the paranormal. He is the dream detective, a spiritual sleuth, and wisdom wanderer. Dr. Mark Fox, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to start the show by talking to you about your new book that's available on Amazon and other places. It's called Temple and the Tomb, and it bridges the academic research and the broader readership in a more popular, readable fashion about the Gospel of John. Can we talk about this book for a moment and how it got started?
Sure, BT, we absolutely can. Well, the impetus for Temple and Tomb was a number of talks that I'd given over quite an extended period of time. My own studies in the Gospel of John suggested to me that what was absolutely central to what John was trying to say was something that had been missed by nearly all theologians, academics, and scholars. That fact being the centrality of the tomb, that is the centrality of the temple, that is the temple in Jerusalem that existed while Jesus was alive and was not destroyed until AD 70 by the Romans, that John was basically trying to say, incredible as it sounds, and it's a theme that runs throughout his gospel, that Jesus himself claimed to be the tomb. Now, in a literal sense, that sounds absurd. How can a man claim to be a vast building made of huge stones, constructed over decades, and yet that seems to have been exactly what Jesus did? So, for example, on one memorable occasion, when he made his protest and overturned the tables in the temple, and scattered the cattle, drove out the moneylenders with a whip, clearly furious, the authorities said, "By what authority do you do these things?" Jesus' reply, "Tear down this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up again." And the people are incredulous. They can't believe it. They say it's taken 47 years to build this temple. And you say you're going to rebuild it in 3 days. And then John simply adds, but the temple he spoke of was his body. In other words, himself. And that is a theme that runs right through John's gospel from that point, in fact, from the beginning of that point to the absolute end.
And noticing that this was something that was missing in a lot of the main theological books.
And this baffles me. I mean, it absolutely baffles me because John, not to put too fine a point on it, hits you over the head with it. Jesus was the temple. Jesus was the real thing. By comparison, that actual temple was a pale reflection, a pale shadow. In what sense was Jesus the temple? because John's trying to say what the temple did, Jesus did. Yeah? So it's in a functional sense, a functionalist sense. He's not basically saying this man is a temple in the sense that a physical building is a temple. He's saying that what this man did is what the temple did. But Jesus did it better because he was the real thing.
And so Jesus' own action, this driving of the driving of the money changers, the people who are selling, the different cattle, the different animals, was a real visceral reaction that he would have just had on a personal level, being the temple.
Incredible, isn't it? Angry Jesus who takes the components of a whip into a holy place and assembles those components to make a whip and uses it because he's furious. He sees what's being done in that stone building temple. He knows it's being degraded. He declaims this fact very loudly and clearly because, of course, he's the real thing, and that's his authority.
And this location, this part of the temple, according to researchers, it's the court of the Gentiles that was taken over basically by individuals who denied Gentiles access as far in as they were allowed to worship God.
I mean, that's probably part of it. Jesus is basically saying nobody is excluded where I'm the temple. They're only excluded from this pale shadow temple, but I'm the real thing. But of course, he's also protesting against the fact that people are buying and selling there in the temple courts. For him, this profanes a holy place. This profanes the most sacred space on earth. And he has the authority to say it. And of course, that's proved by the fact that after 3 days, he does rebuild that temple. And as John points out right at the beginning, during the temple cleansing episode, the temple that he spoke of was his body.
Yeah, the Gospel of John gives us meat morsel after morsel, and it's consistent how many things that he ties into Old Testament allegories and analogies throughout his gospel. And this cleansing is right here in chapter 2. I mean, it's smack dab basically at the beginning of his gospel, right after the wedding of Cana.
And BT, can I just butt in there and make a further point? In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that action is recorded, the protest in the temple, but it's at the end. In John's gospel, as you just pointed out, it's right there, almost at the very beginning. Why has John got at the beginning what the other gospel writers have got at the end? I think the solution is simple. For John, this temple cleansing is nothing short of Jesus' manifesto. And what do? You don't declare the manifesto at the end of the election. You declare the manifesto when the starting gun is fired. And that's why John moves this episode from the end to the beginning. Maybe it actually did take place at the beginning. John's chronology is correct, and the chronology of the other 3 gospel writers is wrong. But regardless, the point stands. It's there at the beginning as a manifesto, and everything that follows is to be seen in the light of that.
That's it. And that's real deep, just right there. Looking at the whole text of the book, the information that you've presented, well, one of my favorite stories and parts of the Old Testament are these dreams. And I thought we would just talk about dreams for a little bit. I mean, aside from Adam being put to sleep and, he wakes up and now he's got a wife, then you have dreams that are actually given. Abraham receives a covenant from the Lord while in a dream. And then we have Jacob and even Joseph. There's these long dream stories that dreams seem to make a large part of the Genesis narrative.
That's a really, really interesting question. And it raises all kinds of other questions in my mind. For example, conventional wisdom has it that dreams are kind of nocturnal eruptions from the unconscious that we sometimes remember, sometimes don't. They can carry a message, a theme, albeit one wrapped in symbolism and analogy. You know what my problem with that is, BT? My problem with that is that we don't know what the unconscious is. We don't even know that there is an unconscious. How is it being used? As a kind of region of the mind. So, like, the conscious is the top region, and then the unconscious is the kind of lower bottom region. And if you're Carl Jung, for example, under that bottom region, you've got an even more bottom region, the collective unconscious. But whichever way you look at it, unconscious, unconscious, as if the mind has regions, as if you can kind of map it geographically. Here's my suggestion. You don't explain a mystery by labeling it. What you do is you examine the label and then you decide whether that label has got any meaning at all. So I think maybe we should go back to the very beginning. Let's stop trying to solve a puzzle as to what dreams are by positing another puzzle, another mystery, the unconscious, which is itself laden with problematic baggage. Let's start again. Let's see dreams maybe as something else. Let's see dreams as messages, not from the unconscious, but from somewhere else. And that brings us to the Bible, really, because when characters like Jacob had their dream of the ladder, they thought it was a message from God. Jacob doesn't wake up and go, oh, I had a dream, the unconscious, or, oh, I had a dream, my psyche was trying to enlighten me. Now, of course, he would not have had those terms, but that's kind of my point. Do the new terms that we've got get us anywhere? Maybe it's time to have a whole new view of dreams, like the one in the Bible, which kind of sees them as messages from God. You know, they're weird, they're distorted, they're symbolic, they're grotesque. But at least these writers aren't positing some strange mystery called the unconscious in order to explain them. They're saying dreams plug us into something transcendent, not something down there, but something up there. And Jacob's ladder, of course, is a perfect example of that.
It's the prefix un that makes the word unconscious kind of a revolting word to define what dreams would be designed or from, as if the opposite of smart being dumb or stupid, unsmart, unconscious. It just doesn't fit, because these dreams are quite honestly very vivid, and people who dream dreams and remember them don't remember them as something subconscious. They're very well aware of events that have occurred. They remember words that were spoken. They remember things they've seen. It's as if the mind is doing something or tapping into something while it's not being actively used by the five senses in normal awakeness.
I think that's a really, really good point. And it might be useful for us, actually, because I've just turned it up here, BT. It might just be useful for us to just read those few verses about Jacob's ladder dream, just so that we can focus on how he understood it. And it's in Genesis chapter 28, beginning at verse 11. Oh, yeah, we can read it from 11, I think, because there may be something interesting there for us too. So we read the following. And he came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to the land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. And now here's the rub, BT, here's the point. Next verse. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. You see, there's this kind of numinous power to this dream that Jacob immediately understands. He immediately decodes. He knows this dream hasn't come from some deep part of him. He knows exactly where it's come from. It's come from the top of the ladder.
There are a couple of individuals who point at the stone that he uses to sleep on. But from what I've understood and read, that using stones to sleep on was actually a common practice. There were a handful of really interesting ways to sleep. Some would sleep basically with their elbow on the ground and their body kind of lifted up in this triangular fashion. It looks kind of awkward, but there's indigenous tribes in Africa that still sleep like this today. And I think there's people who miss the point that the stone, it was just taken. It was just picked up and was like, yeah, this will work for laying my head down. Some ascribe the location being some kind of mystery school area or whatnot, or the ruins of a mystery school. But I think the value here is what Jacob does with it, and then what this location becomes through history. And you go into that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's the actual logical next step, really, because what's basically the first thing that Jacob does after he acknowledges that he's in an absolutely special numinous place? He basically builds a prototype temple. He builds a kind of prototype altar, because he kind of knows that a temple is a fitting place for a God, and God is here. So this is a temple. And the temple is the place where the ladder reaches to heaven and the angels go up and down. And then, as you correctly pointed out, we get to John 1:51, and it's Jesus speaking, talking to Nathanael, and he says to him, truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. Wow. I'll read that again. Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. Where does the ladder rest? Where do the angels ascend and descend? Where the temple is. And there again, actually, even before the temple protest, here's John basically telling us, Jesus said, I'm the temple. I'm where the ladder rests on earth. I'm the place where the angels descend to and ascend from. Where I am, the temple is. And every Jewish reader of John 1:51 would immediately recognize that temple imagery of coming from Jacob's dream, and will conclude that the man who is making that claim is making a claim to be the temple. It's so easy, isn't it, when you see it? It's so obvious. So you just wonder why it hasn't been acknowledged.
Why there hasn't been more ink written on this particular topic. It's such an interesting dynamic that like I said, people could spend hours just right here and looking at Genesis 28 and going back to John 1:51. I mean, to be honest, John's my favorite gospel. It's theological explosion after explosion. There's no doubt in my mind the value of John's book, full of these symbols, allusions, and connections between his own time and his own experience with Jesus, and his deep love and understanding for Genesis. And as we shift gears, I wanted to talk about what you have going on now, Dr. Mark, and the studies and the research that you're doing now.
And there's kind of your link with what we're shifting to talking about and what we were talking about before, because as we've been talking about this whole notion of the centrality of the temple to Jesus's identity, his claim to be the temple in a functional sense, we've been saying, well, that's kind of been ignored by academics for whatever reasons. That's been swerved around or neglected. And then we get to olfaction within anomalous and paranormal and spiritual experience. And what we find is that here too, this is a completely or virtually ignored area. I mean, there's loads and loads of stuff on people having visions, seeing unusual things when they have religious and spiritual experiences. And there's loads of stuff on people hearing things, hearing voices, being guided, etc. And there's even a lot of stuff on people feeling things, such as the presence of God when they wake up from a dream. But there's little or nothing on olfactory elements within religious, spiritual, and anomalous experiencing. And so what I decided to do was what I'd done with 3 previous books, and that is to use the archive of the Religious Experience Research Centre at the University of Wales, Lampeter, a collection of over 6,000 accounts of religious and spiritual experience, many of them absolutely unexamined and unpublished. And my objective was to go through that archive and find whether there were any accounts of people having unusual religious and spiritual experiences where they smelled things with olfactory elements. And I'm still working through that material at the moment, actually. But I would say that rather like the centrality of the temple in John, olfactory elements within religious, spiritual, and anomalous experience have been overlooked by researchers. And that's kind of what I like to do. I like to find things that other researchers aren't really paying attention to, and I like to try and give them the attention that I think they deserve.
Yeah, absolutely. Not just in personal experience that individuals have had, obviously within contemporary time, but from Genesis chapter 2 to Revelation 18, there's like some 200 references made in the Bible about perfume, odor, and smell. And interesting that we were talking about Jacob and specifically Genesis 28, because 27, right before this, is when Jacob receives his blessing from his father, from Isaac. And it makes this like almost this throwaway verse. It's 27:27. And it says that Isaac smelled the smell of his garments and blessed him and said, see, the smell of my son is the smell of the field that the Lord has blessed.
It's an incredible passage, isn't it? And again, it's yet another one of those that people just kind of gloss over because they're so busy kind of taking in the drama of that blessing scene and the twist really involved in that scene, that they never actually kind of recognize that absolutely there is a profoundly olfactory element contained within this profoundly significant moment.
It's an amazing thing. I mean, even way back before that, after the flood, after the whole flood situation happens, we've got Noah. And Noah's first response is to build his altar and to pull out the animals that he had brought with him for sacrifice. And it right off the bat, and when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, this is 8:21, I will never curse the ground because of man. And it's this interesting connection between what we're doing here on earth, the actions of our worship, is this pleasant aroma towards God. And, Isaiah alludes to our worship as a spiritual smell. And so it's better to smell good to the Lord than to stink, which is exactly what we see in Isaiah 3:24. So instead of the fragrance, there will be a stench. I mean, there's these back and forths, and the value in the Bible itself and the use of the sense of smell, even as our research seems to be, something everybody would rather look at rainbows and and temples and miss the idea that this is actually an important part of the gospel narrative.
Absolutely right. And what do you get in a temple? What do you get in the Holy of Holies? You get fragrance. It's there everywhere, isn't it? It's absolutely ubiquitous biblically. So I just thought I would try and see if we could uncover and explore and draw attention to certain features of these kind of contemporary experiences with olfactory elements. And I'm still doing that. That research is still ongoing. What I'm basically doing as I give talks, I'm assembling the material. And this is exactly how Temple and Tomb came to be written as well. Every time I give a talk on the theme, I have another chapter to add to my collection. And when I've got enough material from these talks, I'll put it together again like I did with Temple and Tomb, and that'll be another book. Hopefully one that will interest people, because again, it's going to be drawing attention to something that they may not have noticed before.
Let's just talk about some of those examples from the more contemporary individual who's had some kind of... I've heard stories that people smell roses sometimes.
Yeah, they do. I mean, the fragrances associated with after-death communications, for example, which is a theme of a talk that I gave more or less exactly a year ago. This seems consistent, that when people typically lose a loved one, then at significant moments, either at the point of passing or shortly after the point of passing, when a funeral is being planned, for example, or when a funeral takes place, or on the anniversary of a passing, there will be a smell characteristically associated with the deceased. And that's just kind of one of the areas that I've been examining, because I am aware that has been looked at within the context of after-death communications. But nonetheless, within a more focused, overarching study of olfaction, it kind of becomes significant in that wider context. So the next talk that I'm going to be giving, which will be in September of this year, will be to a UK paranormal organisation, and the name of that organisation is the Unitarian Society for Psychical Studies. And the name of my talk on that occasion is going to be Scent from a Distance, and it's going to be subtitled Olfaction, Premonitions and Preternatural Knowing. Because again, it seems that when people kind of know stuff psychically at a distance, they don't always get a vision, they don't always get a voice, they don't always get a feeling, they will often get a smell. So that's an area that I'm currently working on and writing up and looking forward to exploring on the 28th of September 2024 at this event of the Unitarian Society for Psychical Studies. Because again, I think there's something to be explored there.
I've heard something really interesting to kind of tie this in specifically to Temple and Tomb is 2 Corinthians. Basically, there's this line in there, and without taking a lot of time to try to find it, basically it's Paul is telling us that we need to have the fragrance of Jesus. So basically, do we smell like the Lord? And that's a real interesting thing after we've talked about the temple here, mentioned here right off the bat in John chapter 2. Jesus being the temple, and we're supposed to smell. So do we smell like the temple of the Lord?
As soon as you see it kind of fits the pattern, doesn't it? I think the passage that you're referring to is in 2 Corinthians. I think it's 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 15. And I think he kind of says something like, "For we are the aroma of Christ to God among those who are being saved and among those who are perishing. To one, a fragrance from death to death, to the other, a fragrance from life to life. Who is sufficient for these things? For we are not like so many peddlers of God's word, but as men of sincerity, as commissioned by God. In the sight of God, we speak in Christ." It's another one of those beautiful fragrance passages, isn't it? And I hope I'm not going to kind of bring things down too much if I kind of go on to say, and this hasn't been a big part of my own research, but it's very much been a part of the research of a small number of others, that you kind of get negative fragrances associated with certain types of experience as well. Let me give you an example from my own research. I found that the fragrances overwhelmingly associated with after-death communications were positive. Lilies, roses, other fragrant sources, so on and so forth. When I've come to look at the chapter on fragrances and preternatural knowledge, I've found that sometimes the smell associated with a distant event is negative or not so positive, but in keeping with the nature of that event. So when an event is occurring at a distance that is unpleasant, the scent that a person will get as they kind of discern supernaturally what's going on will also be negative. Can I give you an example? So you've got a situation in the archive that I was referring to earlier, the archive of the Religious Experience Research Centre. This is quite an early account that was submitted to the centre, probably in the late 60s or early 70s. And you got two people who were working at a hotel, and they rarely get the time off together. It's a man and his wife. But on this particular occasion, they do. So they decide to go to the cinema. So they get on the bus, they go to the cinema, they sit down, and almost as soon as they sit down, the lady can smell burning. And they kind of have a little row before the film starts. And the husband's saying, because this was the time when you could smoke in the cinema, oh, you must have dropped a bit of your cigarette on the carpet. And she's saying, no, I didn't, no, I didn't, no, I didn't. And in the end, the smell gets so intense, and only she can smell it, he can't. But the smell for her gets so intense, this acrid burning smell, that she says, look, I've got to go. I've got to go. So reluctantly, he gets up. They get back on the bus. They start for home. And the smell is getting worse and worse. She's getting frantic, even more frantic. By the time they get off the bus, she's virtually running up the drive to the house. She bursts in. She goes through the door into the living room, and just as she does, the babysitter's chair bursts into flames. The babysitter had fallen asleep. Her cigarette had fallen down behind one of the cushions of the chair, set fire to it. The baby is there in the room, of course, where the babysitter is. Fortunately, this mother smelt the smell from a distance, acted on it, and arrived home just in time to save the babysitter and, of course, the baby as well. Now, what's interesting about that example is that the smell itself is not a good one, obviously. She can smell what's occurring, or rather what's going to occur, but the smell itself is congruent with the episode that followed, an episode that could have been much worse. And that's kind of what I found more or less consistently with this kind of distant knowing. That the smell associated with the event was not always a positive smell, because the event that was being discerned at a distance was not always a positive event. So there seems to be a kind of congruence between the sort of smell and the event that is being disclosed through that particular olfactory experience.
And this is all part of psychical research. Could you define for the audience what psychical specifically means and what we're talking about when we mean these extrasensory experiences?
That's a great question. I mean, sometimes I prefer the word anomalistic, as in anomalistics, because psychical, rightly or wrongly, has got all kinds of connotations with the history of psychical research, which tended to revolve around things like mediumship, or extrasensory perception, stuff like that. And to me, that kind of gives a too narrow impression of what is actually a much, much broader field. So I'm sort of evading the question, aren't I? Because I'm trying to suggest that psychical may be yesterday's term, and something like anomalous or anomalistic might be today's.
Well, a loaded word is exactly what it is, and we have the whole era of spiritism to thank for that.
I think so. I do think so. Because when I think of psychic, I kind of do think of ESP experiments with Xena cards. And I think that there's so much more to it than that. I mean, I know we have the Society for Psychical Research, here and in the States and in other countries. But again, I think that they're keeping the term because they want to keep the brand. But the term itself probably doesn't do justice to the breadth of experience that the SPR are interested in.
Yeah. So these anomalous, like you call them, these anomalous situations, these anomalous activities that the human seems to pick up is a really good drive of research, because we don't understand, because this is all part of what you would call the unconscious mind. We don't understand everything that we're tapping into. And Dr. Mark, you've taken the opportunity to just go for it and look at this idea of smelling, the sense of smell, the olfactory sense within the anomalous occurrences, like you've said, like the woman with the at going to the theater with the smell of the scent of burning and finding out that she was literally saving the life of the one tending to the home there. I mean, that's just an example.
Yeah. It is just an example. That's a very good point. And I think it's also worth saying that it's just an example of the kind of experiences that are housed in this particular archive, the Religious Experience Research Centre archive at the University of Wales, Lampeter. I mean, they're not all kind of knock your socks off as good as that one, but very many are, and very many remain unpublished. And I felt over the last 20 years or so, it's almost for me been a kind of mission to take the hitherto hidden treasures of that archive and to make them more visible, to bring them to a wider audience, because many of them have sat on shelves for nigh on 50 years, gathering dust, unread by anyone apart from maybe the founder of the archive, Sir Alistair Hardy. And they just kind of beg to be read. They just kind of cry out to be not dissected, because I often feel when I'm reading these accounts, I'm treading on holy ground, because I'm reading somebody's very, very precious experience that they might have never shared with anybody before. I mean, they freely shared it. If anybody ever says, please don't publish this, of course I never would. But in the vast majority of cases, they wanted people to read these experiences. They wanted to know that they'd smelt a fragrance on the anniversary of a loved one's death, or they'd smelt something going on at a distance that they could have no physical way of knowing and yet turned out to be true. They want people to see these things and to hear them and to ponder them. So that has been really, I think, the thread that has linked so much of my research together. Let's take these hidden things, let's hold these hidden treasures up to the light and see them shine and see what we can learn from them.
Not everybody has a knock your socks off, I talked with an angel at moment, And I think there's value and valuableness in listening to or reading the stories of those who have had encounters, who have brushed up against the divine, who've fallen asleep on a stone and dreamed a dream. All of these moments, they all seem interconnected, and they're all coming to us. They're all coming to mankind.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely, there is a connectedness and a consistency and a thread that runs through history, through religions, through spiritual and transcendent experience, through psychical experience, through anomalistic experience. It's there for those with eyes to see, or any other sense that is appropriate. And I think that will always continue to be the case.
We can lose a family member, and that family member may have really enjoyed a flower, a lily or something. And at some random moment, the brain tells us, hey, there's this scent of this particular kind of lily in the air, and you're sitting there thinking about it, and you're like, yeah, I haven't smelled that since, and then down memory lane you go.
Absolutely, yeah. And smell does that. I think smell probably takes us down memory lane more than any other sense. They've done research on this, that it's actually the way that smells are received in the brain, that there's a kind of directness, a kind of unmediated quality. So the smell, just as the phrase goes, takes you right back. And there's a kind of neurological reason or set of reasons for that, which again is very germane to this whole thing. Smells are evocative, but like virtually nothing else. No surprise, therefore, that they would be such a fundamental feature of transcendent experience.
It's not a matter of going, okay, let's look what these guys are doing, and they read the tarot, but are they Christian? It's kind of like, no, I don't think so, and that's the fresh air that you have brought, honestly, to something that's kind of been clouded for well over a century. This idea of psychical research.
And I think there's a kind of paradox here as well, because I do speak in churches, and sometimes when I do that, I introduce the kind of material that I've been looking at from the research archive. Yeah, so olfactory elements within after-death communications, for example, or olfactory elements within knowing at a distance. I tend to find more often than not, this leaves a lot of church congregations rather cold. It sounds incredible, but religious and spiritual experience, when you narrate these experiences or draw attention to them, you would think that the place, or one of the places that would get the most ready reception, is in a church, whereas the opposite is actually the case. So sometimes you get little or nothing. You just get a silence, that you're kind of casting seed, but it's on stony ground. It's just not good ground. It's not receptive. Nothing's going to take root there. And I've often pondered this, and I've never got a satisfactory conclusion, because you would think that a Christian congregation would see religious and spiritual experience as fundamental parts of their faith, historical and contemporary. But I have to say, based on my experience, that is not often the case. That is not even usually the case.
It's almost as if some communities have forgotten that, Jesus, God, became flesh, and he obviously dwelt among us. And there's connections between seeing Jesus, hearing Jesus, smelling the temple. All these words are used, and I'm almost thinking that there's a draw, this idea that many communities, many Christian communities, have taken seeing the gospel in art or divine art that's available usually within a church setting. Okay, that's this sense of sight. Hearing the word of God proclaimed, that's the sense of sound. When it's bread and wine there, that's touch and taste. And then there's no sense of smell. Not a lot of communities use things like divine incense or holy incense to punctuate their service. And I wonder if that's what happens.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's the excluded sense, isn't it? It's the princess that never gets to go to the ball. Again, I think that's of a piece with the kind of wider neglect in psychical anomalous research generally, where olfaction is the poor relation. You get so much stuff on experiences that arrive via every other sense, but olfaction, that lags way behind. And as I alluded to earlier, that's kind of one of the reasons why it appealed to me. Let's look at what's excluded rather than what's included, and maybe the excluded can tell us things that we didn't know before. But you've nailed it. You're absolutely spot on. that we have a number of senses, and a number of things are elevated within Christian faith to do with those senses, but olfaction so often gets left behind.
As we wrap up, can we talk about, some of the things you do with your website? You do a lot of reviews. Do you go after specific genre? What do you do when you're like, I'm going to blog about these, I'm going to do a bunch of blog reviews on these books that I've read and recommendations, so on and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, my main focus is on the kind of stuff that I research more generally. I like to do book reviews because I think that if people don't know the stuff's out there, they can't read it, and if they can't read it, they can't learn about it. So I'm always on the lookout for good, very recent publications on spirituality, the paranormal, Fortean phenomena, and other related phenomena, and reviewing cutting edge stuff on that, which is what a lot of these books are. Just to distill the essence and bring this research to a wider audience in a way that they will find accessible, and which will whet their appetite to go away and either read these books for themselves or do some digging in these areas. And I tend to write the reviews for a number of journals, and then when the reviewers come out in the journal, I put it on my blog, on my website. And it's again the same with talks I give. Once I've given the talk, there it goes, usually on the blog page. And in that way, the blog page becomes a kind of organic thing. It grows, it doesn't stand still, it's there, it's absorbing new things, it's bringing new things to a wider audience. And that's what I do. I don't tend to review straight theology, except where kind of theology interfaces with spirituality or religious experience or anomalistics, and then I do. But those are the kind of things that I like to look at, and those are the reasons why.
This focus, as your focus, would review something as interesting as Slenderman, the story of, specifically the Slenderman, the story that about the online obsession and the mental illness that was associated with this creepypasta situation.
Yeah. I think that probably comes more under the broad heading of Fortean phenomena, and that is certainly a major interest that I have. The Fortean Times has been, my life companion really, as a monthly journal of strange phenomena. And I think that really, for me, anything that's Fortean is fair game. And I think Slenderman Slenderman does kind of come within that rubric. Also, Missing Persons. So the curious disappearance and death of Eliza Lamb is also something that would be of interest to me. And of course, there are those who would say that there are paranormal elements to that particular mystery as well. So again, I kind of do extend to look at those things on occasion. Missing Persons in particular is an interest that I have, and one ongoing interest that you'll also see from the website is the curious disappearance of Malaysia flight MH370, which has been another major thing that I've been researching over the years. And one that has absolutely fascinated me, albeit in a very sad and tragic way. Yeah, that's a case that won't ever go away. I cannot begin to tell you the number of hours that I invested in exploring and examining MH370 and networking with some of the other researchers pretty much from day one. And there are, suffice to say, a whole number of issues surrounding that plane's disappearance that do not make any sense at all. On the surface of it, many people have claimed, for example, that the captain took it, and they've done that for a variety of reasons. And whilst I can see the validity of many of the points that they make, I have always been troubled by that conclusion. I've never been convinced that the pilot did take it. I can see that if you apply Occam's razor, you probably do end up concluding that the captain took it. But, as has been discussed many times, Occam's razor isn't always the effective tool, the infallible tool that many researchers often seem to think it is, particularly when you're dealing with issues to do with human deception. And I think there is a very real possibility in the case of MH370, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist in any way, I hasten to add, but in this particular situation and this particular event, I think that the truth is known, and I think that the truth has been concealed. But in the absence of the actual concrete evidence that would allow us to prove that, it remains at this point conjecture.
Exactly. The simplest answer is probably not the correct one. Well, Dr. Mark, is there anything, any way people can get a hold of you or read more about your information? I'm going to put whatever in the show notes below. But is there anything else?
Obviously, my website. Yeah, obviously my website, markfox.co.uk. That's going to tell the interested visitor to my work pretty much everything they need to know. There's a books tab with appropriate links. You can buy my books there. You can find out where I'm speaking. You can read my blog. You can find out a little bit more about me. So I think that's pretty much the first port of call for anybody who is curious about what I've been doing.
Well, I wanted to thank you for coming on the show, and I really appreciate the communication back and forth. It's been great having you.
Thank you very much, BT, and I've enjoyed it very much.
Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this, or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. You can also donate on my website. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.